Have you ever wanted to run different kinds of software on your computer, but didn't want to install a different operating system like Mac, Linux, or even BSD? Well, with VirtualBox, it's easy to install a secondary operating system on your primary operating system, so you can run Linux software on a Windows computer or Mac software on a Linux computer. It's easy and it takes a couple of steps, and I'll show you how in this video. Stay tuned.
IT building block.
VirtualBox is a type of hypervisor. It's a type 2 hypervisor. And what that means is that you don't have to install a hypervisor as your primary operating system. You can run it as a secondary piece of software in your primary operating system. So let's say you have a Windows computer or a Mac computer, but you want to run a Linux machine. With VirtualBox, you can take a Linux installation and run it on your Mac or Windows operating system. And it does that by what's called virtualization. Virtualization means to create a virtual machine, which is basically a software-based hardware. You have emulation or indirection of operating system calls to the CPU so that the Linux system running inside VirtualBox doesn't know that it's running in VirtualBox. It's not quite that way because there are certain extensions you can run to run VirtualBox more smartly so that your hardware can interact better with what's in the VirtualBox machine. Yeah, that was a very deep in the weeds explanation of something that's pretty simple to show you. So you're just going to have to hit the believe button with me and follow along. So I'm going to transition to virtualbox.org. So you too can have a virtual operating system in your Windows PC. There's all sorts of other software that's based on VirtualBox because VirtualBox is licensed under the GPL2. So it is open source software, which means you can view and edit the code that runs this fantastic product. However, it is required to have a commercial license if you want to use it for business applications. So you'll go to this download page and pick your distribution. Like if you're running a Solaris host, you can install VirtualBox on Solaris. Solaris has not been seen in the wild for a long time. But maybe you're running Solaris, in which case you're probably not watching this tutorial. Windows hosts, OS 10 hosts are likely going to be the most used options for those watching this video. So just pick one of those. It'll give you an exe, or in the case of macOS, a DMG file. And you'll just install those like you would any software. And then you'll open it up and be greeted with a fancy and friendly interface. So what we're going to do first is go and download an ISO for VirtualBox. So I believe I already have one downloaded. Yep, I have Ubuntu 2004 live server. So we're going to go ahead and spin up a Ubuntu server operating system. And all you have to do is click add. New. And then you'll go through all the various options to create your VM. So we're going to call this test VM. Going to save in any folder you choose. It's going to be a Linux type, and it's going to be a Debian 64-bit. Actually, do they have Ubuntu? They do have Ubuntu. Ubuntu is a variant of Debian, so it's got some extra packages and different configurations available. As to be useful for lots of applications beyond just what Debian is packaged for. So they're really not that different. Ubuntu is just an easier way to get started with Linux. And I highly recommend you get started with Linux if you're looking to do anything in IT, because most of the internet runs on Linux. As much as I hate to say it, Windows Server is a large market share as well, but Linux runs most things. But we're going to go ahead and choose Ubuntu, hit next. We'll give it a gig of memory. This is really cool. You can see I have 32 gigs of RAM on my system, so I can give it like 16 gigs of RAM, and it'll just take up half of my system RAM. So I have a lot of room to play with on this particular machine. Whatever you have, you could have 4 gigabytes, you could have 2 gigabytes. Just give it whatever you think is best for your applications. We're not going to do much with this Linux VM just yet, but go ahead and just give it what you think is best. Click next. We'll create a virtual hard disk. Note about the virtual hard disk is it is not going to be 10 gigabytes. It says 10 gigabytes here, but the virtual hard disk will grow with the actual file system. So on your VM, you'll have things taking up space, but it's not going to reflect the actual amount of space it's taking up in your host operating system. So on your Windows system, you'll have a virtual hard disk that your VM will be able to access, and that's where the VM will have its files stored. But it's not going to take up 10 gigabytes if you choose a 10 gigabyte disk. It's just going to take up what those files are actually taking up in the VM. So like if you have 870 megabytes of files in your VM, it's only going to take up 870 megabytes. So we'll go ahead and create that virtual hard disk. There's lots of different hard disk types. So VDI is a VirtualBox disk image, which will work best with Oracle VMs or other types of VirtualBox installations. So it's very portable for VirtualBox. VHD is sort of in a more open format. It's sort of portable between systems. For instance, Proxmox is another type 1 hypervisor, and it uses VHD files for hard disks. And then VMDK I'm not familiar with, so we'll just figure out how that works and just go with VDI to start with. And then this is where you can have a fixed size or a dynamically allocated disk. So dynamically allocated is what I was talking about before. If you have 870 megabytes on your VM, it'll only take up that much space on the host. So we're going to choose that because we don't want to chunk out 50 gigabytes that we're not going to use. And we'll just give it 10 gigabytes. That seems pretty useful. Okay, and now we have a test VM. But this is just the hardware portion and not the software portion of the virtual machine. To add the software, we need to go to the storage portion. And on the storage tab here in the VM settings, we have a DVD, and we can choose a disk file. And this is where we go to our downloads and choose the Ubuntu Live Server. Click OK. Now you'll see it's mounted in the optical drive there. So now that we've mounted the optical drive, well, let me show you this. So this is what's going to happen if we start our virtual machine without anything in it. It's just going to So here's the virtual machine. It's just booting up to nothing. So it says no bootable medium found, system halted. That's normal. There's nothing in there for it to boot off of. It's as if you were to buy a computer and not have a Windows installation on it. So this is normal. So we're just going to go ahead and shut this down. We're going to power off the machine. And then we're going to go back here. We're going to choose a disk file, and we're going to choose Ubuntu 2004, and we're going to start it. So now that there's bootable media inside the virtual machine, when we start it up, we should be able to see, so now it's going to boot to Ubuntu Live Server. And we're going to go ahead and go through the install process and play around a little bit inside. That's the long and short of it. And you can also install Mac OS or Windows. There's a little bit of a licensing issue with Mac because they don't, Apple does not like to run Apple operating systems on anything but Apple hardware. So it is technically not legal to run Mac OS 10 on anything but a Mac. And with Windows, you do have 180 days of an evaluation period, so you can play around with Windows basically for half a year with no repercussions whatsoever. And when you're done with it, you can just destroy your VM, start up a new one. There's another 180 days. So you can basically workshop any idea you have with a Windows server by just going to download a Windows Server ISO. So yeah, so here's Windows Server 2019. They may want you to use it on Azure. You don't have to use it on Azure. You can just get an ISO. So, or you can do the other thing, get a virtual hard disk, which you just plug right into a VirtualBox machine. And that way you don't have to go through the install process. But you can also just go for an ISO. You fill out some information. It'll download you an ISO, and you can play with Windows Server to your heart's content. And we are being welcomed in multiple languages, so we're going to hit English. I have an English US keyboard, so we're going to continue there. This is where you would set up your network configuration. So we're just going to go ahead and go with what is defaulted, because I believe we're running a NAT, which means it's sharing my computer's network address, basically. We don't have a proxy, so we're just going to hit done. Mirror is US, that's good. We're going to use the entire disk. Yeah, because I don't want to deal with LVM right now. So it may actually use up 10 gigabytes, but you can easily just destroy and recreate this VM. It's super easy to create different systems with VirtualBox, and I really think it's a great piece of software for just kind of workshopping ideas and trying new things. So this is what's going to happen to the file system. Looks good to me. Selecting continue below will begin the installation process and format all disk. It's a virtual hard disk. We don't care. So we'll continue. Jonathan. My server's name is TestVM. VM. Oh, popcorn. Super secret password. Now they match. We won't install OpenSSH server at the moment. SSH is a way to connect to your machines remotely via a terminal. So we're just gonna ignore that and hit done. Ooh, here's a bunch of different software you can install, like the Google Cloud SDK, PostgreSQL, Docker. Yeah, Docker's pretty cool. Let's install that. I'll do a future video on Docker because it's a pretty cool piece of software that allows you to do a lot of things. But yeah, now it's just gonna install, and it might take a couple minutes to get all the things, because it'll install the latest packages and things like that. So yeah, we'll just kind of let this run, and we'll see you in a bit. So we had a little bit of trouble. I had to go ahead and hit reboot now. It seemed to have locked up, and it says failed on mounting CD-ROM. So we're gonna go up here to devices, optical drives. We may just have to shut it down. So let's close, send the shutdown signal. So sending the shutdown signal is like pressing the power button on your computer Power off the machine is like holding the power button on your computer until it turns off or unplugging the machine. So virtually, we're going to unplug the machine and that'll power it down. So now that it's powered off, we can, oh, it's already empty. Okay, so now when we start it, we should have an Ubuntu server installation that we can play around with. It got hung up on installing security updates, so we just went ahead and rebooted, and we'll install the security updates manually once we get inside. So yeah, now we definitely have a boot medium. That's our hard disk now, our virtual hard disk. So now it's running Ubuntu 20.04.1 LTS. Start job is running for udev. Wait for, okay, great. Okay, so our user, whoa, hello. Cool. So now our user is kernel popcorn, and our password I used test123 star dot dots. And okay, wow. So now we're installed. We're getting a lot of issues because it's not finished starting up yet. It's running a lot of cloud init stuff, which is an Ubuntu canonical sort of software that allows VM templates to be created easier. And VM templates are already installed operating systems that you can reuse and repurpose. They're really cool, but I'm not going to get into it today. So, all right, so it should be finished. Oh, goodness. Oh. All right, so if we do apt get update, you should just have to enter the password again. This is going to update the caches for the software that we've used. So you'll see the US archive that we put in when we were doing the repository. So earlier in the installation. So that's what that is for. If you're in a different country, you'll want to get different software. So just do what your country's mirror is, and you can look that up on Canonical's website. So now that we've updated the caches, we can upgrade the software. So updating tells us what software is available. Upgrade will apply the updates to the software. And the TAC-Y, the extra command option I gave, goes ahead and confirms that I want to install those. So now we're installing the security updates. And once those are installed, we can start playing around with Docker. A couple of things you can do. You can edit files on this machine. You can store files. You can serve files using a web server like Nginx or Python 3 HTTP server. You can even use Docker to play around with different pieces of software. For instance, one of my favorite web servers that I use in my home lab is Traffic, which allows you to do Docker containers exposed on subdomains or paths, depending on what you want to do. It's a really great proxy server that I've invested in. But we're getting set up. We are almost done. It's running some hooks. Installing config for VMware tools, which we're not using VMware, so why are you doing that? Done. Are you not? Come on. It's generating a new boot image for the Linux kernel. That's fun. Okay, we're done. Clear the screen. So ls / lists the contents of the entire directory. So it's a little like Windows in that respect, where you have a root file system. Think of that as like C:\\. Except all of these folders here are sort of like the Windows System 32 folder. You don't really want to mess with the files in here unless you know what you're doing. Where you do want to mess with them, though, is the home directory. So I have a home kernel popcorn directory, and I can do whatever I want to the files in here. It's like a desktop, My Documents, Pictures, Downloads folder, all rolled into one. I can do kind of whatever I want in here. So I can create an index HTML file and say the hello world. And then I can run Python 3 with http.server. And now our VM is hosting some files. So if I look at the IP adder, we need to look for the IP address. We're looking for 10.0.2.15. So let's serve that again, and then we'll go to 10.0.2.15, and then :8000, and we're doing 8000 because it says it's serving on port 8000. So I think if we hit enter, we should get hello world. .15. You know, we may not have the network set up the way we want to. Attached to net. Well, okay. Let's do this. Let's do and this is where Google comes in useful. How to run a process and return in bash. No hup process and so I need to do it at the other end. So now it's running on port 8000, right? So if I curl 127.0.0.1, which is the home address. So whenever you're on a computer, the TCP/IP stack has an address for you to go to, and that's the home address, which is always 127.0.0.1. That is home. So when you're curling that, we should get hello world. Oh, right. Need to specify port 8000. Hello world, look at that. And if we edit index HTML again and add another paragraph, we can say now we're serving this. Right, we save that. Yes, right. Then we curl again. Now we're getting the edited text. So if we had set up our networks correctly, we could see this page in a web browser on our host machine. So we'll go ahead and set that up next. Just give me 1 second. Okay, so I've powered down the VM so that we can edit our network. to expose our HTTP server. VirtualBox has a couple of different adapter types. The default one is a NAT adapter type, which means that everything can go out and come back to the VM, but nothing can get into the VM from outside unless you set up a port forward rule. Port forwarding lets you expose different ports in your TCP/IP network stack to the outside world. So for example, your home network usually has a NAT gateway that actually lets you get out to the internet. So that's usually your Wi-Fi router. Your Wi-Fi router connects all your devices and then sends requests on your behalf and then passes them back to your device, like your phone, your tablet, your game console, whatever. And then only those things which you allow can get into your home network so that you can expose a website or something from your house. Most ISPs don't want you to know that that's possible because they don't want to be in the business of serving web traffic to users. So generally speaking, residential ISPs don't want you to port forward web pages to the outside world, but you can do that. And with VirtualBox, it's a similar situation. It's like you've created an isolated virtual Wi-Fi router that you want to set up port forwarding to. So for our cases, our purposes, we've got something running on port 8000. So what we're going to do is set up a port forward from port 80 to port 8000. So to do that, you open up the settings by right-clicking and doing settings or clicking on this gear here. Then you go to network, and adapter 1, you'll see it's attached to the NAT. So advanced, you'll see adapter type that lets you choose which type of virtualized adapter you have. Promiscuous mode deny means that most traffic is going to be denied on the way in. MAC address is just a way to do a virtual MAC address. So the cable is connected, virtual cable that is. And then port forwarding, this is the rules that we want to forward to our VM. So we'll add one. We'll say this is TCP because HTTP goes over UDP, and we'll say HTTP server, and the host IP 0.0.0.0. Host port will be 80. So when we go to localhost, we should be able to see whatever's on port 8000 on the guest. So the guest IP will be 0.0.0.0, and the guest port will be 8000. I think that's right. If not, I'll have to do another take. But you know, we're looking pretty good. So we'll hit OK. We'll start. Boot up the VM. We'll run the Python HTTP server, and we should be able to see the HTML file we were editing. So the reason why it asked me for access to Windows networks is because we're now exposing something to the outside world, and we're doing that via localhost. So basically what it's doing is saying that port 80 on my host is now going to be forwarded to the 8000 on the VM. So that is a way for us to expose different services. Like you could have a Terraria server running in VirtualBox. You could have a Minecraft server running VirtualBox, and all of those have to have ports exposed. And in that port forwarding dialog, that's how you can do port forwarding. I'm not sure that the 0.0.0 IP address was the correct way to do it, but it is a way to indicate that all interfaces should direct themselves to that port. So basically, if I try to access localhost on my computer, I should be port forwarding to whatever interface on the VM. There's only one, so it's not going to matter, but we'll give it a shot. Let's see. So let me log in. Kernel popcorn. Test 1, 2, 3 star. Okay. Clear this out and run Python 3 and HTTP server. So now it's serving on the VM. So if I pull up a web browser, and go to localhost, hey, look at that. There's our HTML file. So now you'll see we have 404 message file not found. That's because it was looking for a favicon, right? And then we also found the index HTML page which was there. And then, yeah, so now we have a fully functional HTTP server that we can access on localhost. So this is great. So I'm going to cancel this. And now we're going to do something a little bit interesting. We're going to expose something on port 8000 that is more than just an HTML file. So on Docker Hub, there's a image called Who Am I by Continuous. So what we're going to do is do the docker run command to run this. And Docker is something I'll touch on in another video, but basically it's like running another Linux machine inside of a Linux machine. It's not quite that way. It's not quite as isolated as a single virtual machine is, but it is a way to share resources without conflicting with different versions and file paths. So let's go back to our VM. Let's do docker run let's figure out the port mappings for continuous. If I go to the repository and look at the Docker file, it is exposed on 80, so I will need to expose 80 to 8000 to get our port forwarding rules to pick up. So I think Docker run p 80 8000 continuous. Is it containous? Containous. Okay. Like contain us, and then who am I? And what's going to happen is we need to add user mod ag docker, the group name, and then kernel popcorn. What this command will do is add me to the Docker group, add my kernel popcorn user to the Docker group so I can execute Docker commands. For my password. Okay. Add Docker. Try this again. Okay, now I'm a part of the Docker group. But to get this to work, I have to log out and log back in. So exit, popcorn, and then log back in. And sudo is something that allows you to run commands as root. So that way you don't ever have to log in as root. Okay. So now we should be able to do Docker run. Mission denied. Well, this is interesting. We're going to troubleshoot this now. And we may just go ahead and wrap that there. This is one of the ways you can use VirtualBox is for web development, and Linux is great for web development. So if you found this video to be helpful, you know, keep trucking on with VirtualBox and leave a like in the, you know, down below. Subscribe if you want to, hit the bell. I hope to be doing more of these in the future, and I would really appreciate any support you're able to give me. Let me know in the comments what you'd want to see an IT block video on next. Yeah, credits will roll here shortly. They may be over my face. I haven't decided yet. So yeah. Trying to remember what I can do to get into the New Vegas Strip. Yeah, that's that.